Hi, Julie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Leah. Thanks for having me on your show.
As I was saying to you before I hit record, I was thinking for this episode, we kind of have two halves. In the first half, I want to talk about your book and your story. I love hearing about people's stories with how they got into this work. And then in the second half, we talk more specifically about the niche that you're in within this work, which is
hmm
PCOS and intuitive eating. And so for listeners, so you know what's coming.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Awesome. So I would love to start by hearing you tell us about your story with your relationship with food and body as much as you're comfortable getting into.
Mhm. Yeah. Where should I begin? Like my first food and everything? Like, let's go that deep.
I I really like people's origin stories. I think
Yeah,
sometimes we start to
do it.
glaze over them. It's like, yeah, yeah, we all had our stuff.
Yeah.
But I find that there's just a healing aspect of
Mhm.
hearing other people.
I think it's fun to share it too, especially as dietitians. I think we have interesting ways that we find dietetics that are surprising. I know what I wrote in my application to my internship, why I decided I wanted to be a dietitian and how it wasn't necessarily a lie, but it wasn't exactly the truth either. So, what is that? But yeah, growing up, I was someone who had a lot of fun with food. I don't know. It was something, yeah, that I just thought was fun. And I feel so lucky that I was brought up with parents who didn't talk about dieting. They didn't talk about it in that way. I got some training on how like certain sizes are more ideal than others, but besides that, which is still enough of a problem, but
Mhm.
besides that, I feel like I had a pretty neutral experience. And I also always lived in a thin body, so I also had lots of privileges, so it didn't even have to come up. And then when I was figuring out where I wanted to go to college, like I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I really wanted to be some kind of creative, like an artist. And I also had some interest in therapy. So I was like, maybe I'll be a therapist. And I chose one particular college that I wanted to go to. And my parents were like, oh no, you're not going there. Like it had reputation as a party school.
Mm.
So parents were like, you can't go there. And I was like, no, I'm going to go there. They're like, well, then if you're going to go there, you have to declare a major. And I was like, oh, that's fine. I'll either major in art or psychology. And they're like, oh yeah, you can't major in those two. So just you need to pick a major or you can't go and they can't be those two. And I was like, okay. So I got like the catalog, which you didn't have that. But like this was this really thick book they would send you and had all the majors in it. And I just randomly opened it up and pointed at a major and it was dietetics.
I love
And
it. Talk about not being type A, we were saying before we hit record. You know,
yes.
I resonate with that so much, not by how I picked my major, but how I picked the school I went to. I was just like, I don't
Yeah.
care. And a counselor I had at sleepaway camp went to the University of Vermont, and I thought she was cool, and I was like, yeah, I'll go there.
See, that's exactly like when I went and visited, I just went with my friend in high school. She was visiting her boyfriend who was going to school there. It was Ohio University, in case you're wondering. And I had such a great time visiting there. It was just like a fun spring day, and people probably were out day drinking or something. And I was just like enamored by the energy of it all. And it was a great school for me. It was the perfect choice. I found great friends. And yeah, I was kind of good enough at science, and I did like teaching and there's some creativity in nutrition. So I kind of made it my own anyway. But I really just went through the motions. And then they told me, oh, you have to find this internship. So I kind of just kept going with it until I got an internship. And that was a year there was only like a 40% placement rate. So I was like, well, I guess I'm going to do it.
Right.
I mean, I have one of the few spots. And that brought me to North Carolina where I live now. And after that was over, I thought for sure I wouldn't be a dietitian anymore because I didn't like the training and dieting. Like I was like, this is not something I do in my own life. I don't see it being helpful. And I really liked talking to patients, but I kept getting in trouble because I was taking so long. Like I wanted just to sit and talk to patients. And so I was like, maybe I'll go back and become a therapist like I originally was thinking. And I had like, college loans to pay off and things like that. So I decided just to keep working and see if I could just find something to kind of get me through the next few years. And luckily, I did find an area of nutrition I really enjoyed, which was working with kids and kids with type 2 diabetes in particular. I ended up becoming a diabetes educator at this big hospital. And I really loved working with kids and families. But It was after probably, I don't know, close to about a year where I was like, oh, I think the problem's me because kids and their families would either like not lose any weight because I was there trying to help them lose weight, or they wouldn't come back. And I'm sure you heard the term non-compliant, but that
Yeah,
was
such a
the thing that,
loaded,
yeah.
stigmatizing term.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what the providers I was working with or, colleagues would say, well, they're just non-compliant. And which is fine after maybe two or three, 10 patients. I don't know. But when it's like, I was like, I'm the common denominator here. This is not, how can this always be all these other people that are like not doing it right? What if it actually is me? So that's when I did leave to get training as a therapist. So I took a leave of absence for 2 years and was like, I'm going to be a therapist now. I'm going to say bye to dietetics. And as I was leaving, this is something I mentioned in my book. Like as I was leaving my job at this big hospital, I found a dietitian to replace me and was training her. Her name's Alice Baker. And I told her, I'm like, you're here with me on my last day as a dietitian because I'm never going to do this shit again. And she's like, oh, why? And I told her, I was like, I think diets are stupid. I don't get it. I don't think they work. They're harmful. And she's like, oh, you should read this book. And she like wrote it on a post-it note, Intuitive Eating. And she's like, read this before you quit.
What
And so,
year was this in?
2002.
Okay, so intuitive eating is very new still. It
Yes.
came out in like
Yes.
97, right?
Yeah, 96 was the first edition, and I bought the second edition. So, in 96 or 95, 96, that's the year where their first edition still had like a lot of like weight focus in it.
Yeah.
And by the time I got to it, the second edition, it was more aligned with, the practice that I do now. But it took me about a year to read it, so that's why I ended up getting the second edition. But anyway, yeah, about a year into grad school, I finally read it on some break, and I was like, oh, there's people for me. Like this is before we had like social media. So I didn't know anybody else doing non-diet work. And yeah, so then I decided to not leave dietetics and I finished up the next year in grad school, really focusing on I want to stay a dietitian. I just want to be a more effective and like just help people better, by being trained as a therapist. And so when I finished that training, I finished that degree, I got a job at an outpatient clinic with a hospital. And they hired me to be like a behaviorist, which was kind of cool. Like I was still a diabetes educator. So people who were like really finding it hard to make some behavior change, they would send them to me. And if they were having some grief with the diagnosis of diabetes, I would work with them. But I also was the dietitian for people with eating disorders and then again higher weight kids with type 2 diabetes. And then I had a small part of my job as the gastric bypass prep dietitian. So I had a good 6 months of that in my in my experience. And then yeah, so that's a job where basically though everything kind of came crashing to a head for me when I was kind of grappling with not like helping people recover from an eating disorder, really getting my like feet wet in intuitive eating and still helping people lose weight.
Yeah.
And I know for a lot of us, we have these experiences where we kind of are having to do both, especially if you want a paycheck and like a full-time job or something like that. And I was in that place. And I describe in the book this time where I was having to teach a body image class for this liquid diet company, and it was all about like body acceptance and love yourself no matter what. But yet, people were like getting these like powdered broths to eat all day to eat,
Yeah.
not really even eat, just to drink, and they were like torturing themselves and paying lots of money for it. And so I was supposed to teach this like 30-minute class and it ended up only being like 3 minutes because I was like so overwhelmed with holding all of this in my head at the same time. And I got in trouble and I cried at my boss's office. And she was like, yeah, you just need to do this if you want to keep this job. So thankfully I was in a place where I could quit that job. And that's when I started my practice. And this was in 2005. So yeah, 20 years later, I have evolved into like at first I was just working with people with eating disorders, but I kept seeing people with PCOS. And I was a diabetes educator still at that point, but I knew that people with PCOS it wasn't the same as diabetes, but that's all we really knew what to do. And also, all we were told to do is help people with PCOS to lose weight.
Mhm.
And I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, how can I help people with PCOS recover from an eating disorder when I know weight loss is just going to really fuck with that? So, um, I basically was like, I just need to try to figure it out. And over the years, thankfully, some clients were like willing to be like the experimental people to
Right.
see what we can figure out what works and what doesn't. And yeah, so 20 years later, I have like these buckets of tools that I'm like, this is what helped a lot of people. It's not like evidence-based from like, it's not been published in a journal, but it's practice-based evidence where I have, yeah, 20 years of experience with clients where I have found, adding these tools
Mm.
helps to manage some of the symptoms and also not diet at the same time. So, yeah, so that brings me to today.
And I want to talk more about the specifics of those tools in the PCOS in the
Yes.
second half, because yeah, you have this great line in the book of like opening the big Krauss nutrition textbook and it was like one line on PCOS and it's like, okay, great.
Yes.
Like what are we supposed to do with that?
Yes.
Your story is, I love it. I love hearing people's origin
Thanks.
stories. And I really related in when you were describing this moment of like the dissonance with
Hmm.
doing work with people with eating disorders and also practically prescribing eating disorders to
Hmm.
folks with who have gotten bariatric surgery or kids who are in bigger bodies. Like it's just
Hmm.
so confusing as a provider when you're like, how can we be causing a problem almost like in it's like the whole thing of like if you're higher weight it's considered good and disciplined but if you're not then it's an eating disorder but it's like the same
Yes,
behaviors.
exactly.
I'd love to shift into hearing a little bit about this concept of finding your food voice, which you have the beautiful book behind you, and
Yeah.
how this came to be. What's the origin story of that concept?
So I, for a long time, did not call the process I was doing with clients, finding their food voice. It came from a place of intuitive eating as a foundation, but I was doing so much with clients with really like repairing the relationship with food instead of um, some of the technical sides of intuitive eating. And I know intuitive eating has so many different nuances with it that it does include this kind of repair experience. But I was spending a lot of time in that and helping people to build that compassionate space within themselves to help them get curious and not feel so ashamed of how they are relating to food. That it was really like I was seeing kind of an end goal of like peace. And so I started using more of like a food peace kind of terminology. And a lot of my work with people was often people who didn't have the same identity as me. I'm a thin white woman, and like most of my clients did not share those same identities. And what I was starting to appreciate, I was like, oh, the way that I'm seeing this end point of food peace is probably not the same for every person. And there's going to be many people that are not, it's not going to be peace because the world hasn't evolved enough yet. And so I'm like, there needs to be something more. Like, I need to evolve this concept because it's not an accurate way to really describe the journey. And so much of this, I think of when we're repairing our relationship with food, there's all these different relational type of concepts that come up that from my training and therapy, I've appreciated like how we relate to food does mirror how we relate to other people and other situations in our life. And I also think for me personally, I didn't mention this earlier, but it's kind of like this like side part of my life is I have struggled for most of my life with an anxiety disorder. And, most people with an anxiety disorder probably can relate to not feeling comfortable doing like presentations or like speaking up in class.
Mm.
That horrified to think about like Julie in, grade school through probably the first year of my work as a dietitian, like so much anxiety over any public speaking or even like in a meeting and having to introduce yourself. Honestly, though, that still frightens me to death. Like, that's like the worst. I'm like, I'll be on a stage with 1,000, 10,000 people. I don't care. But if I have to go around the room and introduce myself with 10 people, I will like literally shake and
Yeah.
feel like all the like the nervous system like stuff. But anyway, so I'm saying all this because part of this process for me, selfishly, is also like I've been finding my own voice in this journey. And like now the beauty of being almost 50 as well is like I feel so much more confidence in my voice. Something that's kind of like a big grief, but also the greatest gift at the same time is like the world stops caring about you as a woman as you get older. And so you can't like it's like you lose some privilege, but also you can really do whatever the fuck you want now, you know? Like no one cares as much. And so finding my voice has been a part of this process. And I just remember talking to some people about like how our relationship with food kind of it combines with this process of like finding your voice. And so that's how finding your food voice was born, was this concept of like I cannot tell you what eating without dieting is going to look like. You know, some people use hunger and fullness, or like some people use the time of day or some like other self-care techniques, but everybody's going to have their own innate wisdom to take care of themselves. And as a dietitian, I want to help you get there, but I can't build it for you. You know, I just want to make room for you to have your own. And that's your food voice, you know? And so, yeah, that's how this kind of concept was named and built. And from there, just gathering all the patterns and themes that the diet industry has, like it's so freaking predictable that it was easy to kind of build up the methods to make the process of finding your food voice, because as like new and inventive and sparkly and shiny as diets can be, like it's all the same shit, really, in the
Yeah.
end. It has the same kind of like predictable trends. Yeah.
And how would you define someone's food voice?
So the way I describe it is this internal system we were born with that tells us how much to eat, when to eat, and what choices to make based on what's available. So this communication can be through like hunger and fullness, like we may have already have on our radar from intuitive eating, but it also can include like fatigue, mood, or satisfaction. And we can get this communication through like thoughts or feelings, or again, maybe guided through some kind of like structured self-care. But it's unique for everybody. But what I have found is there's always three individual traits for a food voice. It's always very flexible, it's kind, and it's nurturing.
Mm.
So getting to those three key areas is basically that's the process of it. It's like coming to that knowing that you are born with that is always going to be flexible. Again, thinking about like different times in your life when you have access to food, when you don't have enough time or enough money, or I don't know, like I don't know if you've ever been involved in a natural disaster, like in North Carolina where I live, we have like hurricanes and tornadoes. So like the power goes out and they're like, and you lose all the food in your fridge if it goes out for a certain period of time. So like those are times where you have to be more flexible. And so allowing that, and then also being really kind as well, and kind of tapping into that compassion, because we're all doing like the best we can with the certain circumstances, especially these days. But it's also a food voice is something that we have to always remember is a human right, like having access to what we need and to be kind and flexible with it. And as we connect with our own food voice, a part of the process also is appreciating that not everybody is going to have that. So we need to work to help everybody else find theirs.
Right, right. If your life is
Yeah.
so busy and stressful, it's hard to hear your food voice or make space and
Hmm.
time for it,
Hmm.
depending on whatever social determinants you have. So, in your book, you have these beautiful dear food letters kind of spread
Hmm.
throughout, and one is from you, dear food, love, a concerned
Hmm.
dietitian, or
Hmm.
concerned dietitians in general, and you have different sort of demographics of people giving the perspective of their dear food letter. I'm curious to hear more about this. Is this something you actually have clients do? Do they actually write letters to food? What do you
Mhm.
think the value of sort of personifying food in this way is?
Well, the concept of writing a letter to food is something that I did with clients for a really long time. And since you and I are on video, you may be able to see there's like a little blue,
Yep.
it's this really pretty vase that has a flower on it. And I think I got it from Anthropology in like 2010. It's like
Mhm.
this really cool blue color with like a big flower burst. But what you can't see it is it also has a big stopper on the top. But one of the things that I did with clients is when they would finish therapy with me, like we were saying goodbye and not make any more appointments, I would have them write a letter to food. And part of the process, I didn't describe this in the book, but part of the thing that I did in sessions is kind of like, when you were working with someone for years, like a lot of us do, it's a very like intimate relationship. It's just like you become very close with this person. And so, as we do this all day long, we get kind of more used to it. But our clients, like we're their only dietitian or like one of very few. And so like saying goodbye is hard. And also saying goodbye into a world that hasn't even like healed its own eating disorder yet is scary. So what I always would tell my clients is like, let's write a letter to food. And you can dump out anything that you want. It could be some things that you're happy about, some things that you're proud of, but then also things you're scared of. And then I would tell them, like, this letter is where your eating disorder is going to live. And let's rip it up and put it in that jar, and we're going to seal it so it could just stay in my office. It was almost like a way to like hopefully just leave the eating disorder behind, and like
Yeah.
go off into the world. And when I was I knew I wanted to do a podcast, like, and like, gosh, when podcasts were like so clumsy and we just had our iPods, then you had to like download from the computer and then like hook up your
Yes.
iPod onto that thing. I think it was like 2007 or 8, like somewhere in there, because it was before my daughter was born and she's almost 17. I remember thinking I wanted to do a podcast, but said daughter was born and then another kid. So I put it on pause. But when I was finally starting it in 2016, I wasn't really sure of the format. Um, but then I did think about those letters and I was like, oh, that would be a really cool idea because it's a part of narrative therapy is if your listener doesn't know what that is, it's basically like taking something that's like not a person, but an inanimate, you know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Object.
Inanimate. Yeah.
Yes. And making it like a human thing so you can actually have a conversation and help to like separate yourself from that and give space to really clarify whatever you need to clarify. And that type of personification it can be really helpful and therapeutic. So I'm like, oh, well, I can have listeners write letters to food. I'm like, will anyone write in and give me a letter to
Mhm.
read on air? I don't know. And then I was studying like how to do podcasting, and someone had recommended like find something to have at the very end of the show to keep people listening. And so I
Mhm.
was like, oh, I can have food right back at the end. And then hopefully people will want to listen to the whole show because they'll want to hear what food has to say. So that's why I included it in the podcast. And then when I finally got this book deal and I was like, oh, I was like, I have to include letters. Like that's
Mhm.
just a part of the process. I think it's a really great tool to like help describe how to apply these types of tools that I have in the book. And I also think it's like writing your own Dear Food letter. And for those of you who are dietitians, you as well, like having time to just take everything out of our brain and put it on paper to help sift through it is in itself therapeutic.
Mhm.
So, so yeah.
If someone listening wants to do this, like what are the instructions? Dear food, what should they put in the body of the letter?
It can really be anything. And I know that's a horrible answer for many people, especially for our type A friends. But what I like to say is like just start out by saying dear food and like let it be a free expression kind of exercise where you don't have any limitations. But talk about maybe when you learned about your first diet, maybe talk about a memory you have with food. Like, I don't know if you have a very early memory, Leah, with food. Like, those are often helpful to talk about because sometimes we have positive first
Mhm.
memories with food. And sometimes people don't. Sometimes people's first memories with food is when they're told that they're eating too much. And then just go from there and ask questions. And again, doing that to allow yourself to hopefully allow more space between your relationship with food and to like let it breathe a little bit.
hmm I love it. I really love that prompt. Anything you've noticed as themes when you are reviewing all of the Dear Food letters you've seen in your
Mhm.
career?
Yes, we all feel alone. We all feel so isolated in this, but we're all struggling with the same damn thing. Like everyone's wanting to like get it right and finally make sense of it, but just feels like they're doing it wrong. When you and I know that's the reality is like diets aren't going to work for most people. Like no one's doing it wrong. It's going exactly as predicted, right? And that's one of the big reasons why I wanted to do the podcast and write this book too, is like everyone's feeling so alone and isolated, but yet like there's millions of people experiencing the same thing.
Right.
So if we can take away that isolation, that will help shame have less like fuel going to it. So
Mm,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. What came up for me when you said that is like, there's such a performance of dieting and eating clean and being good, whether it's like posting on social media before and after
Mhm.
pictures or photos of aesthetic salad bowls or showing up to like a Weight Watchers meeting and getting applauded and everyone kind of just be performing like discipline, quote
Mhm.
unquote, and doing good. But then the situation can look so different behind closed doors of like, secret binges and feeling like
Yes.
shame and then there people are like just see what is being presented and performed on social media and when they're out with a friend and their friend seems to be just eating a salad and being fine, but
Mhm.
really that's only just the tip of the iceberg. And I feel like the
Right.
Dear Food letters and the kind of work you're doing helps expose, no, there's a lot more going on behind closed doors.
Exactly. I think that's so well said because most people would report like everyone else has their shit together because of those social media posts. But you and I both know those folks doing those posts also are feeling behind closed doors just the
Right.
same shame and they're
Or
just like an act. Yeah,
right.
like
Or
that.
they're not, but they will soon. Like they're at a
Yeah,
point in their
eventually.
on their
Yeah.
timeline where it seems to
Hmm.
be working, but it's not
Yeah.
sustainable and we know that the long term. So it's like, the
Yes.
kind of cliche of like don't compare your chapter 3 to someone else's chapter whatever. Like it's
Yes. Yes.
just a different moment in time. And then also I love to say to clients like, do you think someone would look at you in public and think, "Oh, she has her shit together,"
Hmm.
because you're performing the same way, but people just don't
Hmm.
know what's what
Exactly.
else is going on.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think we'll shift into PCOS chat
Yes.
now.
Let's do it.
The book is amazing. I said to Julie when we spoke last, I just think it's really creative. I've read a lot of the anti-diet books in the anti-diet space, and I just think the Dear Food piece so early on for someone who like never listens to your podcast, doesn't know your work,
Hmm.
it's such a unique way of interacting with this topic, of personifying it. And for
Hmm.
people who are more like creative minded versus like research minded, I think it can really resonate if even just, yeah, what would I want to say to food? Like what
Yeah.
comes through when I think of writing
Hmm.
that on the top of a page.
Hmm. Well, thank you. I'm glad. And yeah, something that I think when I was writing this book, I appreciate we have colleagues who've written amazing books already on the research behind why diets don't work. And I do include a little bit of it, but I was really like, no, I want to make something that felt like someone was in my office sitting on my couch and what I would want to say to them in a session.
Mhm.
That's what I wanted to put in the book was like
Yeah.
the tools that I would use along the way. And there's, yeah, we need the books that are like the deep dives into all the research. And that was not going to come from me because, again, I'm not the type A dietitian who's
Yeah.
going to do that work anyway.
We all have
The
different,
messy. Yeah.
right. We all have different strengths. My
Yes.
favorite professor from undergrad said this thing on the podcast a few episodes back, or not a few episodes back, a few years back. I'll try to
Hmm.
link it in the show notes. She said, research is just one way of knowing.
Yes. Yes.
And like story and lived experience, like that's another way of knowing. And it's one in our society that we often don't hold up as valuable, but it is.
Hmm.
It's completely
Yeah.
valuable. It just like Yeah, I feel like it's very like white supremacy-ish to be like, show me the research. And it's like, okay, well, nutrition research is really hard.
Yeah.
Like to do, it's complicated, even if we have
Yeah. It's
research.
so hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's shitty. Yeah. Yeah. Evidence-based practice has three arms to it. And only one arm is the scholarly journal like research.
Right.
The other one is practice-based evidence. So like, yeah, what I was saying earlier about working with PCOS, like, yeah, 25 years later, I have found some things.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the client or the patient and their preferences and like what they have access to.
Right.
So
That's such
yeah,
a good
yeah,
reminder.
yeah.
So PCOS, this is how I got introduced to you. I was saying to you a while back when I was living in Brooklyn. I remember hearing you on Food Psych, and the episode was about PCOS. And like you said, we don't learn a lot about this in undergrad.
Mhm.
I learned a lot from you. So I'd love to start by what even is PCOS, like broad overview?
Okay, let's do it.
Yes.
So PCOS is an endocrine disorder that starts in the brain, and it has very little research, of course, because people with ovaries are who gets it. And it's often just considered a reproductive disorder, but really, again, just because of the world around us. The majority of PCOS research is only into the reproductive consequences, but it also has metabolic and psychological consequences to it. And so, as a dietitian, we often would hear about PCOS from clients, whether they've been diagnosed or not, when they talk to us about painful fatigue and super intense primal carb cravings. That's what I would hear so much about in my practice. And what I have come to appreciate is that PCOS, because it is so under researched, it has this like real ambiguous kind of criteria to help diagnose it. And it's called the Rotterdam criteria. I'll name it just quickly in case someone's listening and kind of like, ooh, do I have this? But Leah and I cannot diagnose it, but we can prompt you to go to a healthcare provider who can. But the Rotterdam criteria, someone with PCOS just needs to meet two out of three. But one is irregular or absent ovulation. Two is signs of high androgens like testosterone.
Mhm.
And the third is evidence on ultrasound of immature follicles and on around the ovaries. And there's a certain number and size of the follicles. I don't have those committed to memory. Those were incorrectly called cysts at one point. So that's why it's called polycystic ovary syndrome. They're really immature follicles, but a person doesn't need to have those in order to have this condition. But this condition, because it starts in the brain and in the hypothalamus, it impacts hormones, and just about every hormone is impacted by PCOS. But what ends up happening is this kind of like ricochet effect that it ends up affecting people differently. Like there's like different kind of symptoms that can come about from it. So that's why not everyone is going to have like high androgens. Not everyone's going to have irregular cycles or absent cycles. But what we do know is people who have it their whole life, but they only can be diagnosed when they're menstruating, which really sucks. Because certainly once someone's at midlife and through old age, they still have PCOS. And if anything, like the metabolic side of it ends up becoming the biggest concern. But yet there's no treatment really, or there's doctors are often like, I don't know what to do. But if you have PCOS as a listener, you probably were diagnosed and told, here's birth control to help with like cycles. Come back when you're trying to get pregnant and lose weight. And so, like I was saying earlier with PCOS, I was already committed to not putting people on diets anymore when I started seeing all these clients with PCOS. And what I have found is, and research has too, is people with PCOS are more likely to have an eating disorder because, like, in the formula at diagnosis, they're told to go on a diet. And,
Mhm.
like, oftentimes also told to omit carbs and sugar when that's like the very thing that their body is like primally craving so intensely because of these high insulin levels, because insulin's a hormone. So many people with PCOS, it's estimated 95% of people will have high insulin levels. And when that happens, it causes the body to crave carbohydrates so intensely. Like my clients would talk about how it felt like they feel like almost like an animal. Like it was just this primal,
Mm,
I'm going to die if I don't eat that plate of brownies I just walked past, you know? And so then when a person eats the food that they're craving, because that's what we do as human beings, we're wired to survive, and they were just told to not eat them, there's a lot of like shame and blame and then restriction and then
right.
binging, and the cycle just kind of begins. So, um,
All or nothing.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for taking us through that. And I didn't know the
Yeah.
thing about them incorrectly being called cis. That's a good.
Hmm.
So you mentioned a little bit about this common advice that someone might get, which is, lose weight, here's birth control, come back when you're
Hmm.
trying to get pregnant. Can we talk about the myth that weight loss solves PCOS?
Oh, yeah. Ugh. Do you see my face react?
Yeah.
It does not cure it. Oh gosh, yeah, because that's often what people are told. Well, first of all, a lot of people are told that they cause their PCOS if they gain too much weight or ate the wrong thing or something like that. And that's not true. It is passed down through families. There's definitely genetic connections to it. And weight gain doesn't cause it, so weight loss doesn't cure it. You know,
Mhm.
it is a lifelong condition. And I don't care what someone is talking about on whatever social media that we're using these days about curing their PCOS. They may be in a place where they don't have a lot of symptoms. And something that I know to be true about dieting is oftentimes dieting will have some really cool short-term outcomes where
Mhm.
it may like lower insulin levels or lower androgens, but then long term, it just makes it worse.
Right.
And I see that without a doubt with PCOS. And this is where I really think diets harm people with PCOS more than other people because what we know about the consequences of long-term dieting is that it causes insulin to be higher and inflammation to be higher. And those are the two things that you do not want to go higher with PCOS to help avoid the symptoms with it. So yeah. Um, I lost my train of thought, but
Well,
that
yeah.
happens.
I mean, I'll pull out two good things. I just heard you say one, it's not your fault, which is such a
Yeah.
common struggle for
Mhm.
for folks in diet culture, feeling like everything's our fault.
Yes.
Our health is fully within our control. And like you're saying, it has a
Hmm.
large genetic component. And then the other piece of weight loss doesn't cure it, um,
Hmm.
because weight gain doesn't cause it. And
Right.
people in small bodies have PCOS and people in large bodies have PCOS. So
Mhm.
we,
You can be any size. Yeah. Yeah. And I forgot that's how we started this part of the question was like the weight piece of it. And certainly pursuing weight loss is the direction people get, right? They're told that they need to lose weight in order to manage their PCOS. They're often given, they're often like told that they're going to get diabetes. Like that threat is used as a weapon, basically, to really push people into dieting, thinking that it'll be the cure. But what I have found with clients is like eating enough, making sure you're eating consistently throughout the day, eating enough carbs and enough other macronutrients is the thing that helps PCOS symptoms more than anything.
mm,
And I've mentioned the extreme fatigue, but that was always like the number one complaint people had with PCOS. And so much of it I found was from chronic dieting. And
mm,
so it could take a couple years really to like recover from like the trauma of a diet on your body,
totally.
especially with PCOS. But once people were getting enough and also getting like enough rest, sometimes their body weight would go up or stay the same. I guess sometimes it would go down too. I don't know. But like people's PCOS would improve by eating more, not less, you know?
Yeah, totally. So if weight loss isn't gonna cure PCOS and a lot of this probably
Mhm.
like pop culture stuff you hear on social media isn't either, what have you found in your 20 years of experience? You mentioned this big toolbox of things you've seen that are consistently supportive to folks. I'd love to hear some of these gems in this toolbox.
Yes, let's get to it. So I always like to start with the gems that help the most people, you know?
Okay, yes.
That's what I would always tell my clients. I'm like, I have an arsenal, maybe a cesspool, however you want to call it, of things that we can go through. But let's just start with the ones that help most people, and you tell me which ones you want to go with. But the first one is make sure you're eating enough, of course. So like Many people with PCOS, when I would first start working with them, they would be eating like once a day,
Mm,
and like, oh my gosh, your body is starving. It needs more food. And so, finding ways to add enough. And that's where like it's really important to not get totally focused in on like good versus bad foods because I'm in the South. So in the southern part of the US, people always talk about nabs. Have you heard that phrase? That
no.
I love how foods are just called different things in different
Yeah.
places. But like the Nabisco like packs of crackers, like they
Okay.
come in
Yeah.
packs of like 6 or 9. So they call them in the South, they call them nabs. Okay. So even if it's a pack of nabs, just taking that and like as you're walking off to go to or walking out the door to go to work, at least starting with something. And like and I use that as an example because a lot of times people will be like, well, I'm not supposed to eat those, but eat something. Like let's just get your body
Right.
fueled.
Adequacy before
Yes,
worrying about the
anything else.
contents. Yeah.
Exactly. But what I've noticed, like that takes a while really to like work through all of the shame and blame, all the food rules to make sure someone is getting enough. I mean, that could take 6 months to a year of like working and um, you can still do other things that I add to it. And this took me a while as a dietitian to be okay with, but I used to like want my clients to eat enough first and then add supplements in.
Hmm.
And I realized I was like, yeah, I'm kind of being a little like elitist here with this. Like, why not start supplements earlier if it could actually help? And one thing that I noticed is two in particular, inositol and omega-3 were two, when people added them as they were working towards eating enough, they felt so much better. Like
Mm,
physically, like the cravings and the fatigue would start to lessen and mood was improving. And so then it helped them actually eat enough because things were just easier.
right.
So that's the other one is, you know, checking in with your healthcare provider about an inositol supplement. And then also an omega-3 supplement. Those are the two that anybody who's ever diagnosed with PCOS, I'm like, start those two right away. And
Hmm.
then there's other supplements too that I would often recommend to people. And then I do with the folks in my membership, but those are much more like specific.
Right. You'd have to know what's going on to probably
Yes,
say.
exactly. And inositol in particular is one that has a lot of really interesting research behind it. It's a B vitamin that people with PCOS probably have a defect or a deficiency of two different types. And supplementing with it is really cool because it's something that helps to lower androgens, it helps to lower insulin. And yeah, people, especially people who have been like chronically dieting for years, when they add the inositol in and they start eating more, it's so amazing to hear how
Mm,
good people are feeling. And then it's like, what the hell? Other people feel this good all the time.
totally. I've
Just,
had so many.
know?
Yeah, me when I have two moments like that in my life when I learned about intuitive eating and I was like, oh, whoa, life is so much better. And then when I
Yes.
started my anxiety medication, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy.
It's not fair, right? Like some people just have nothing weighing on them all day long.
Yeah.
But so that's those are three things. And then the other one in the toolbox that I always like to start with is what can we add to your what you're eating now? And I usually start with protein just because most of the people that I was working with were not eating enough. And so adding protein is something we know that can help with repairing some of the damage and the harm from restricting.
And helping
And I
with blood
think,
sugar control too with the, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then there's like fiber and fat are the other ones that I often will talk about adding. And those can help with blood sugar too. But with the protein in particular, there's something about the chronic inflammation with PCOS that I think that just makes people with PCOS probably need more protein forever, you
Mm,
know?
mm,
Um, and yeah, so I usually would start with adding protein at the first meal and then add a snack before bed. And then if, sometimes people get bored of protein foods, I'm like, okay, let's go look into some foods with fiber and fat and see if that does it just as well for you. And then from there, sometimes people start to tell me things like, I'm actually craving some movement. This feels weird. What do I do with this? And, so that's where honestly, I would kind of like look for that comment from a client to know, okay, are they ready for movement? And because usually the body would let them know. And movement is something that you can add to PCOS management if you are eating enough and your body has repaired. It's something that can help long term with like your blood sugar and insulin levels and things like that. But the other thing I haven't mentioned that I also start with from the beginning is focusing on rest and sleep because
Mm,
75% of people with PCOS have some kind of sleep disorder. And having a sleep disorder that's not treated, and if you're like taking care of everyone else in your life, like it's gonna really F with your insulin levels
yeah.
and promote more inflammation too. So boundaries, rest, meditation,
Self-care.
anything that you can do to like help your body calm the fuck down is
Right.
going to be really good for PCOS. And yeah, you probably need more sleep too
I
than
love
most.
that. It's
Yeah.
just hearing you say focusing on sleep and rest. It's just so refreshing, I think, from our like hyper productivity culture that like that's like,
Yes.
ew, you're not allowed to sleep or rest. But yeah, like
Mhm.
it plays into so much with this work of like you can't hear your cues if you're like have so much attunement disruption from like being, overly stressed and not getting adequate sleep. So I'm gonna say them back just so the listener can like kind of, if they're taking notes, we have
Yeah.
those supplements you mentioned, omega-3 and
Inositol.
inositol. We have making sure you're eating enough, adequacy, adding in protein, and then maybe also fiber, fat. We have looking at sleep and getting enough rest. And then maybe
Hmm.
if the body calls, honoring the call for movement.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and with the sleep and rest is also boundaries. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
like you probably need more boundaries too than other people. And I say that a lot. Like you may need more than other people a lot because with PCOS, I think what gets missed is that it is this chronic condition. You know, it's not something that we have a cure for. If you are allowed to live longer, if you stay alive longer, like if you make it to old age, your PCOS is going to be there too, and it's going to
Mm,
probably be worse. And so having more boundaries is something that you may just need in order to like get enough self-care in. So
mm.
I don't think the world is really built for people with chronic illnesses or chronic conditions. And it's important to name that PCOS is this chronic condition. And so yeah, you just may need more
Yeah.
because of that.
I love that permission and that reminder. So important. I like to ask everyone who comes on the show two fun questions. The first one, I'm especially excited to hear your answer because
Uh-oh.
it feels related to finding your food voice. So I got really interested in asking people. I talked to a ton of folks in the intuitive eating space, and I find the word intuition to be so loaded. So I like to ask people, what does intuition mean to you and how do you experience it?
So intuition to me is what my gut instinct is, or like what my knowing in my body is, like what it's guiding me towards. And
Yeah.
what was the other question? What was
How
the
do
other
you
part of that?
experience how do you
I
experience
don't.
it? Like how do you know how
It's a
does
feeling.
yeah,
It's a feeling. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm a big feeler though. I'm an Enneagram 4, so I feel everything.
yeah.
Yeah.
My last question for you, Julie. What is your current biggest diet culture pet peeve?
Um,
Like of the moment, because I know there's so many.
the MAHA, like the Make America
America,
Healthy.
healthy,
Yeah,
healthy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Anything in
yes.
that whole sphere. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
More bringing it back to the individual and the bootstraps, you
Right.
know.
Your health
Hmm.
is your fault. Pull yourself up, fix this.
Hmm.
Ignoring social
Hmm.
determinants. Same. That's definitely
Yeah.
a huge pet peeve for me. Anything else on your heart that you're feeling called to share, whether it's about PCOS or finding your food voice, food letters, anything at all?
No, I mean, you have asked me very good questions. I'm like, is anything else on my heart? No, not at this moment.
Okay.
So
Well,
I
obviously
appreciate
buy
the
Julie's
question.
book. So
Oh
this will
yeah,
come out. The book comes out when?
March 25th. So I'm
That's my
assuming
birthday.
after,
Oh yes, we talked about like how funny is that? It's my birthday. Okay. So
yeah.
this it will be out by the time of this episode. I'm like almost positive.
So it'll be anywhere you buy books, or you can go to my website and find a place to do that there at julieduffydillon.com.
Awesome. Yes, find your food voice. And where
Yeah.
can someone find you if they want to learn more about your book or more about your work to stay in touch with you?
So all the things are going to be on my website. Just go to julieduffydillon.com. Yeah, you'll find my book, my podcast. I have a newsletter, all the
All the
things.
stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks, Leah. It was so great talking with you.